message box is a dialog that is displayed through code. And the command is simply MessageBox.show and then some arguments in parentheses or parameters in parentheses. So the first argument is the prompt. And this is the very simplest message box we can show. So here I have a stub for a button called BTN test that when the user clicks on it is going to display a message box of MessageBox.show. This is the prompt. And this is what would come up in our executing program. At this point, it pauses from executing any other code in our stub and waits for the user to respond. In this case, click an OK button. So a message box might be used to pause execution, but it's often used to display information, especially output back to the user, or to gather some information. And we'll see later on in the semester that we can have multiple buttons here that we can determine which button the user clicked and then branch our code into one of 2 or 3 different directions. The prompt is a string, and so as such, this is the prompt is in quotes. Now I can also use what's called a string variable. So here I created a variable. We'll talk about variables this next week. This is a string variable which I named my prompt. I could have named it Fred, and I assigned it a value of Hello South Mountain Community College. So in the MessageBox.show, rather than having a literal string like we did up here, I could use a string variable. And this is the dialog box that would be shown. Hello South Mountain Community College. Our dialog boxes by default will get a close X on them, but when you click OK, that would also close the dialog box. We can add a second argument to the MessageBox.show statement inside the parentheses, and the second argument would be a title. That title is also a string. This ability to put different things inside the parentheses of our method, remember methods always have parentheses. Show is a method of the MessageBox class or MessageBox object. The ability to put multiple items or different items inside the parentheses is called overloading. So here we have MessageBox.show. I still have this as the prompt, and I added title goes here. And you see we now get a title in the title bar of that dialog. Now the color that's displayed here is going to be dependent on whatever the user has set up in their Windows settings. In this case, I've set mine to blue. It could be red, it could be green, it could be white, or many different other options. Again, since the title is a string, I could create a string variable to contain that. In this case, I added a variable called string my title. So string is the data type. The variable is called my title. That's the name of the variable. And it's assigned a literal value of welcome to SMCC exclamation mark. And so my MessageBox.show now shows the message prompt separated by a comma and the title, which is my title. And this is what we get. We get our prompt and our title, and by default we get an OK button. A third option is to change the buttons that are displayed. So in our code I have my prompt and my title string. A third item here separated by a comma from the title is MessageBox buttons dot, and when you're typing this in, the IntelliSense is going to give you 6 different options. These are the choices of buttons you can have. You can only use these groupings of buttons. So I can have abort, retry, and ignore. The OK is the default. I can choose OK cancel, retry cancel, yes no, and yes no cancel. So here, instead of just the default OK, I chose to display the OK cancel, and you can see how that's changed my message box display. Again, the user can click on OK, they can click on cancel. Both of those would dismiss this message box and go on, but down the road we'll see how we can do different things based on whether they chose OK or cancel. For instance, we might have a message box come up that says, in case they accidentally click on an exit button, we might confirm, do you really want to exit? And you might say yes or no or okay or cancel. And if they said okay or yes, you could exit the program. If they said cancel or no, the dialog box disappears and nothing else happens. They remain in their program. A fourth option is to display an icon. So here I have my prompt, comma, my title, comma, the message box buttons I want to display, comma, and then I can do message box icon, press the period, and the IntelliSense is going to give me 9 different options here. Now in reality, there's only really 4 different icons because asterisk and information display the same icon, error, hand, and stop display the same icon, exclamation and warning display the yellow triangle, and then there's a question icon. There's also a none. So here I have chosen question, and I get an icon to the left of the prompt. That's where it's always placed. A fifth option is to change the default button. So by default, the first button has what we call the focus. If I press the enter key, it'd be the same as clicking on that button. However, I can change the default button so that the second button is the default. So here I have 2 buttons, yes and no. I still have my question icon. But then I've added a 5th item, a message box default button dot, and you can choose button 1, button 2, button 3. So we only have 2 buttons here, so button 3 wouldn't have any impact, but button 2 makes no the default button. And I could press the enter key instead of clicking on no. Now, the user can also press the tab key and go back and forth between these buttons. So it's simply setting up what we anticipate the user would want to click on. The items always have to appear in this order: prompt, title, buttons, icon, default button. As we've seen, we can eliminate ones from the back and only have 1, 2, 3, or 4 arguments. But if we want to have a default button, and maybe we don't want a title and we don't want a message box icon, we still need all 5 items. They have to be in that order. So here I've got my prompt of unable to save. I didn't put up a title. I chose abort, retry, ignore as my buttons, no icon, and I set the 3rd button as the default. So finally I want to demonstrate in a project how the message box stops the execution of code. So I'm back in that project we created earlier as far as the college colors. I'm going to double click on my SMCC button. And I'm going to add a message box here at the top of the code we wrote previously to simply say MessageBox.show. And our prompt is going to be Go Cougars. Our title will be SMCC. Then put a semicolon at the end of that statement outside the parentheses to end my statement. And I didn't specify a button, so the OK button will be the default. Let's execute this. So here's my project running. I click the SMCC button. Notice I get my message box come up here. Go Cougars as my prompt. SMCC is the title. Nothing else in that code though is running until I click the OK button. So let's pause the execution, and then it changes the text and the colors of my label and would display the logo in the top label.